A 290 horsepower small block may seem out of place on a list of V8 Titans, but Titanic can refer to either size or scope, and there is no more consequential muscle car engine than the Ford 302. Originally developed for the 1969 Mustang Boss 302, which was intended for use in the SCCA Trans Am Racing Series, the Boss 302 was more about endurance than launch speed, at least at first. This modest engine would embark on an epic journey of self-discovery. 302 cubic inches is 5.0 liters, and that is a displacement that is very important in the Mustang's history. During the awful Pinto Mustang II period, the 302 was the only available V8, and then, with the glorious Fox body Stang, it was renamed the 5.0-liter and defined the entire 1980s. The 302 found new life as the 5-liter Coyote V8 in the modern Mustang Dark Horse, which cranks out an astounding 500 horsepower. That's a pretty awesome 55-year story arc, and why the Boss 302 is a true titan. GM, mercifully lifting its ban on engines over 400 cubic inches of displacement in intermediate cars, gave Buick its mightiest ride of the classic muscle car era. The 1970 GSX was the only Buick Golden Age 13-second car, and it was because of the 455 cubic inch Stage 1 V8 under its bulging hood. At 360 horsepower, on paper it seems a bit underpowered, but output was almost certainly underestimated, and the engine ground out 510 pound-feet of torque, giving it tremendous oomph off the line. Also, the 455 used thin wall casting, which made it significantly lighter than similarly sized engines, which helps out in the power-to-weight ratio department. The 1970 GSX, unfortunately, was a one-hit wonder as, in the subsequent years, the 455 would be detuned into a sad shell of its former self. For that one amazing model year, however, it was a superstar on the streets and launched a Buick performance line of succession to the 1987 GNX, which could crush a 12.7 second quarter mile. The 1964 Pontiac GTO, which kicked off the golden age of American muscle, was actually a response to GM's big engine ban as a crazy fast intermediate car. Initially, the GTO was equipped with a 389 tri-power V8, but Pontiac figured they had a few more cubic inches to play with and introduced the 400 in 1967. Having reached the size limit, they then looked at ways to increase the horsepower, which led to the high-performance Ram Air versions of the 400 cubic inch V8. The 1969 Ram Air 4 had a hotter cam, higher compression, and better airflow than the base 400, which gave it the kind of power found in engines with more displacement. In fact, after GM lifted the ban in 1970, Pontiac made a 455 cubic inch V8 optional for the GTO Judge, but it was only rated at 360 horsepower. The 1969 Judge Ram Air 4 was the first 13-second GOAT and set the standard for the iconic nameplate. When the GTO got a reboot in 2004, it drew inspiration from the 400 Ram Air with a relatively small but powerful 6.0-liter V8 that ensured it was still a 13-second car. The Chevrolet Camaro is the only GM muscle car that was never equipped with a monster big block. During the GM big engine ban, it was limited to under 400 cubic inches, and when the silly moratorium was lifted, for whatever reason, Chevy never produced a 454 hyper-performance version. Several dealers found a loophole in the Central Office Production Orders program and were able to order first-gen Camaros with 425 horsepower, 427 cubic inch Corvette engines, but that was never an official Chevy offering. Despite the lack of a monster V8, the Camaro established itself as a performance ride and carried that reputation all the way to 2024, when it was sadly discontinued. That distinction of kicking ass on the streets started with the 396 turbojet V8, which was definitely not turbocharged, but sufficiently powerful. There were three versions of the 396 of various power ratings, with the 375 horsepower V8 under the hood of the 1968 Camaro SS being the top. It's not a coincidence that the modern Camaro relies on a powerful sub-400 cubic inch V8, as that is the iconic pony car's heritage. The Chrysler 392 firepower V8 was never installed in a muscle car, and yet it is one of the most important muscle car engines of all eras. With hemispherical combustion chambers, the firepower series were the first Hemi engines, though they were never marketed as such. Built for use in the 1957 Chrysler 300C, the 392 was the most powerful engine at the time, creating the first-ever factory ass-kicker. The only reason why the 300C wasn't the first muscle car is that it was pricey, and affordability is an important component. The 300C and its awesome 392 did, however, plant the muscle car seed, proving there was a market for factory performance cars. More importantly, it laid the groundwork for the 426 Street Hemi, which was the defining V8 of the golden age of American muscle, as well as the most dominant of the streets. Its legacy was further cemented by the modern muscle car era, in which, once again, the Hemi V8s power the baddest rides available. In 2012, Dodge introduced a 470 horsepower 6.4-liter Hemi engine option, and those familiar with the metric system will recognize that it converts into 392 cubic inches. Introduced mid-model year in 1964, the Ford Mustang was a huge success that has propelled it to one of the most iconic and longest-running nameplates in the world. It was created for pure enjoyment, rather than high performance, and even the souped-up Shelby GT variants were no match for any GM or Mopar muscle car. Then, in the late 1960s, Ford opened up the Mustang to some serious big block options and gave it a wicked fastback design, which transformed the playful pony car into an angry street machine. Ford wanted to homologate their new 429 cubic inch Cobra jet engine for competition in NASCAR and other racing circuits, so they shoehorned it into the 1969 Mustang Fastback, and the legendary Boss 429 was created. Along with the 1969 Mach 1 428, the Boss 429 was the first Mustang that could legitimately be called a muscle car, and is the origin story for Ford performance. All the insane horsepower modern Mustangs owe their existence to the Boss 429, and maybe one day Ford will resurrect it, preferably with a 7.3-liter Megazilla V8. The Chrysler Max Wedge 426 not only foreshadowed the Hemi V8, it was the last piece of the puzzle for creating the greatest muscle car engine of all time. The 426 Wedge began life as a non-catalog option on Chryslers in the early 1960s with single 4-barrel carbs and dual quads variants that produced between 373 to 421 horsepower. In 1963, the Max Wedge 426 came out and was offered in B-body Dodge and Plymouth models, transforming them into genuine street terrors. With 425 violent ponies under the hood, the 1964 Plymouth Sport Fury was the first muscle car with actual muscle. The only reason why Dodge and Plymouth intermediates with either the Max Wedge 413 or 426 are not regarded as the original muscle cars is because the 1964 Pontiac GTO marketed itself as such and appealed to a youthful segment. They were, however, the most fearsome rides of the early Golden Age years. The Max Wedge 426 established the cubic inch standard for the soon-to-come Street Hemi, as well as the magical 425 horsepower output that made it so dominant. When Dodge rebooted the Charger in the mid-2000s, they did it with a 5.7-liter Hemi V8 and a 6.1-liter Hemi that uncoincidentally produced exactly 425 horsepower. The Hemi V8 is simply the most important muscle car engine of any era, and we have Ford being a Karen to thank for it. The 426 cubic inch Hemi V8 was developed as a NASCAR engine, and under the hood of Richard Petty's 1964 Plymouth Belvedere, it was unbeatable. Instead of building their own engine that could compete, Ford complained to NASCAR, which in turn banned the Hemi until it was homologated, meaning it had to be sold to the public in a certain number. Homologation requirements are usually fairly low, like 1,000 units or so, but Chrysler decided to make the 426 Street Hemi optional on all intermediate Dodge and Plymouth models. Once the 426 Street Hemi hit the streets in 1966, the golden age was owned by Mopar because there was no other muscle car that could keep up with them. As amazing as the Hemi was, it became even more incredible in the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. All 426 Street Hemi-equipped rides were 13-second cars, most in the mid-13s, but the 1971 Hemi Cuda ran a quarter mile in 13.1 seconds. It was even quicker than the 1970 Hemi Cuda by 0.2 of a second, which makes absolutely no sense. Once the modern muscle car era came back around, Dodge, of course, equipped its rebooted Charger and Challenger models with Hemi V8s that continued their street dominance. The Chevrolet 427 Z11 V8, like the Chrysler Firepower 392, is an engine that was never equipped in a regular production muscle car and yet is still significant to the movement, though in a weirder way. The W-Series 409 cubic-inch dual-quad V8 became a street legend in the third-gen Impala, thanks in part to the Beach Boys' hit song 409. Chevy wanted to make it a legend on the track as well, so they stroked out the 409 to get 427 cubic inches and installed them in 50 special 1963 Impalas, sold as factory drag cars. With a 10.8-second quarter-mile time, Chevy achieved their goal of creating the ultimate launch vehicle. Here's where things get weird, because Chevrolet certainly considered making the 427 V8 an option on their production vehicles. But then GM decided that all of its divisions were not allowed to participate in racing or equip their intermediate cars with 400-plus cubic-inch engines. The timing of the Impala Z11 and the GM ban, both in 1963, can't be a coincidence. It's possible that corporations saw the terrifying power of the 427 Z11 and envisioned endless lawsuits, so they put the kibosh on it. Had the Chevelle and Camaro had access to the 427 Z11, the golden age wouldn't have been owned by Mopar. GM finally lifted its arbitrary big-engine ban in 1970, just in time for the golden age of American muscle to be over. 1971 was the last great year for muscle cars, as 1972 marked the beginning of the dead horsepower era with detuned engines that seemed like a mockery of the once mighty street machines. Chevrolet put an exclamation point on the classic era with the 454 cubic-inch LS6 V8 in the 1970 Chevelle SS. Topping out with 450 ponies, this wonder car won the horsepower wars, but more importantly, finally gave Chevy fans something that could run with the big dog Hemi-powered Mopars. The 1971 version of the LS6 was down to 425 horsepower, which is still pretty cool, but things would drop drastically after that. The 454 is actually a great gauge to track the decline of the classic muscle car as it started at 450. Then 425, but in 1972 it was down to 270, and by 1974, when it was discontinued, it was a 245 horsepower parity. In its most potent form in 1970, it was unquestionably the most powerful muscle car engine, and its power rating would carry over to the modern Camaro SS. Shockingly, Chevy discontinued the Camaro in 2024, but even more astounding is that they never gave the Chevelle a reboot, like maybe with a 7.4-liter big block SS performance package. Well, there you have it. 10 V8 titans that built America's muscle car legacy. What engine should be in this list instead? Comment down below and let's discuss. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button to keep you updated on our future uploads. Until then, I'll catch you on the next one.